When I was at school, oh, let's see, 457 years ago, the only platform that existed was console. You were either a Nintendo kid or a Sony 1%er or just a sick little Sega freako. Those were your options. No other platform existed. I slightly take that back. I had a cousin who owned an Atari Jaguar.
Some of you believe your system is the most advanced in the universe. Let's review the numbers. Sega Genesis is 16 bits. 3DO is 32 bits. The Atari Jaguar is 64 bits. Which is more advanced? Clifford!
Imagine that. Imagine being the kid who said, "F you mainstream ups with your Sonics and your Marios. Me and Rayman were about to take over." Bless him. I'm trolling, but you know, Rayman was decent. And Alien versus Predator, for a kid like me back in the 90s, that thing scared the dick off of me, is what it did. I mean, obviously I reattached it and then had sex at least once.
Introducing Alien vs. Predator for the 64-bit Atari Jaguar. You might not want to play it alone.
What you'll notice missing from these accounts is the personal computer, or the P.C, as we call it on the streets. The only kids that really played PC games were like the same kids who had family members in tech. It was so fringe, it may as well have not existed to us. You did get like the odd rando kid just rolling up in the playground and be like, "Hey, any of you guys play Wolfenstein?" And then the other kids would just be like, "What? Gareth, speak English." Poor Gareth, bless him, he'd just recede back into the shadows on the edge of the playground, never to be heard from again. Kids can be assholes, can't they? Listen, right, Gareth was cool. Like, I went over to his house and played Duke Nukem 3D. He owned Duke Nukem 3D. I mean, any kid in the 90s who owns Duke Nukem 3D immediately goated. No one knew Gareth's true power level. Much like the platform that he played games on, just sadly too far ahead of his time.
Shake it, baby. You wanna dance?
Rest in peace, Gareth. He's not dead. He's very much alive. I don't know why I said that. As you can probably imagine, horror on PC was a niche within a niche. There was some crossover successes, very few. Alone in the Dark, for instance, a game that arguably invented survival horror as we would come to know it. But if we're talking games exclusively on PC, games like Nocturne.
Yes, stranger. Let us spar. I don't think you'd like the outcome.
Or System Shock 2.
Do you ever had hypo? I'm so sick.
These games had like 5% of the cultural impact that something like Resident Evil would have. There are so many interesting games that at that point just kind of got lost to time. Things like Sanitarium.
Disciple of Bob? What faith is that?
It is the truth. Bob's word is truth. He is the eyes and ears of God. Oh, glorious and most holy of Bobs. Bob is the most Bob of all. Hallelujah. Praise be to Bob.
Or I have no mouth and I must scream.
My, I am gorgeous. Why, I could just plunge right into myself.
These are games that people have rediscovered recently, but for the longest time, just sort of disappeared. I haven't even mentioned FMV games yet, by the way. FMV standing for full motion video. These games were nuttier than squirrel shit. I love them. I mean, they're not scary, but they're among the most entertaining things on the internet to stream or like play with friends. Just absolutely hammed up D-movie style acting, wrapped up in like wild ideas and visuals, just served to you in like this exquisite shit platter. Games like Darkseed or Harvester just toe this line between laughable and jarringly weird.
Hey, Mike! Your shoes are bleeding!
Oh, you're so gross, Mike. No wonder Rita would rather be with my husband than with you.
For instance, have you ever seen the music video for Black Hole Sun? One of my favorite music videos of all time, specifically because it has like the most jarringly weird and, I don't want to say upsetting, but just off-putting quality to it. It feels untethered from any kind of reality, while also representing a kind of reality that seems fairly familiar. It's such a visual thing that if I was like describing it to someone, if I said to someone like, oh yeah, one of the shots is just like a housewife in a kitchen preparing fish, and they'd be like, well, okay, that sounds pretty normal. And then you'd be like, here's that shot, watch it. And then they just pause for a minute like, am I drugs? That's the vibe of 90s FMV horror. Am I drugs? They are Am I Drugs games.
Ouch! Not quite the reunion you hoped for, was it?
So slight non sequitur, but you know, that's kind of what I do. The first horror game I ever played on a PC was a game called Blair Witch Volume 1 Rust in Par, developed by Terminal Reality, who previously had made Nocturne, a game that I mentioned earlier, being somewhat significant. The funny thing about Rust in Par, again a Blair Witch game, is that it was a sequel sort of in spirit, but also kind of in practice to Nocturne. I believe Rust in Par came out in the year 2000, and only a year or so prior, the Blair Witch Project, the movie, had just absolutely set the world on fire.
Tell me where you are, Josh!
People were, if you believe the newspapers, people were running screaming from cinemas, like no one knew if it was real or fake. It was huge. The Blair Witch Project was a huge property, intellectual property. And Terminal Reality had this opportunity to make a game based on the Blair Witch. And the craziest thing is, they were allowed to make it within essentially the universe of Nocturne. Nocturne, the game, kind of centers around this paranormal agency that goes out and investigates monsters and strange phenomena. They basically brought that agency into Rust in Par to investigate the Blair Witch and the whole Rust in Par history. And that crossover just is fascinating to me. Like, how often does a developer get approached with a huge property and they're just given creative license to be like, yeah, if it fits into something you've already done, go for it, you know? It's absolutely unheard of that anyone would be given that kind of reign to tie in something. Like, things are so heavily under lock and key. There are so many guidelines, so many like clearances, for everything now. To think that back then someone had the keys to a huge horror kingdom in their hands and they were just like, you know what, you've already made a game. Why not just make it sort of like that and integrate the two? Just amazing. And yes, I hear you. I hear you fellow elders saying to yourself, hey, Nocturne sounds a lot like X-Files. It was basically the X-Files. They basically stole the basis of the X-Files and made it a game. And guess what? Nocturne was great. Amazing game, actually. I mean, it was amazing for then. There's definitely jank. It's very obtuse, Rust in Part 2, but the vibes, immaculate. I mean, this game scared the absolute Sunny D out of me as a kid. And check this out, you can actually download the game for free. I'm not gonna tell you exactly how. You know, just in case they're watching me. Don't know who I'm referring to in that situation. But you know, just in case, I'm just gonna say, Google the game. Just Google the game. It's right there. As we get deeper into the 2000s, a few games of note are popping up, but nothing that's really, you know, turning the heat up for the platform. Although, depending on how well optimized those games are, they could very well turn the heat up on your PC, if you know what I mean. Hey. Games like Pathologic or Black Mirror or Dark Falls or cult classic White Day, for all my real ones out there. These all released solely on PC, but none of them made much of a dent, to be honest. And they certainly didn't have folks on console like side-eyeing PC and rubbing their hands together like a fuckboy from 5 years ago. The decade closes out with the staggered release of an episodic trilogy, all under the umbrella of Penumbra, made by a teeny tiny little developer called Frictional Games. The series is pretty decent, like solid 7s all round, but again, no one wants to fuck a PC over them or anything like that, you know? However, at the turn of the new decade, Frictional Games have been putting in the work, putting in the effort, putting in the hours, taking all the lessons that they learned from their Penumbra series a year or two earlier and applying them to a new wee little game called Amnesia: The Dark Descent.
Don't forget, some things mustn't be forgotten. The shadow hunting me. I must hurry.
Amnesia, on its own merit, pretty incredible game. It kind of rewired the way that people looked at first-person perspective games generally. Like, for the longest time, there had been FPS games that spook and shock you, but they also armed you with sick weapons that turned lingering threats into like dog food. And we'd been conditioned to expect that from the FPS genre over the course of like 20 years. And now Amnesia came into the space like Sean Parker in The Social Network. Only instead of saying drop the Frictional Games were just like, that S in FPS, why don't we just throw it in the river? This was first person without the shooting, without any offense, with no real empowerment whatsoever. Your only tool against the dark and like the monsters in it was just tiny pockets of light that you often had to create yourself and was resource dependent. So if you used up all your little tinder boxes, lighting every single lamp in a tiny hallway, only to go through a door and down some steps into a horribly crooked basement that was completely pitch black, Buddy, you are God's problem now. Welcome to the Shadow Realm. Enjoy your stay. Now you had to fight fear and encroaching madness to book it through, closing doors behind you, hoping you were entering a room with more tinderboxes. Because the longer that you stay in the dark, the worse the voices and the scares get. The excitement and the curiosity around Amnesia collided basically head on with this very platform, YouTube. And one huge offshoot of early YouTube was episodical Let's Plays. And it's through Let's Plays that Amnesia really became the cultural phenom that it ended up being. People like PewDiePie and Markiplier were on the come up, but Amnesia stuck a rocket right up their asses and sent them all the way to Money World. And you know, in turn, that huge exposure would shift units and give them more attention. It's the circle of content. It moves us all. The cultural impact of Amnesia didn't just affect us little freako gamers, but it also affected the little freako developers making the little freako games for us. Man, I should have rewritten that sentence. Taking power away from the players, ironically enough, empowered smaller devs, encouraging them to sort of go and make their passion projects, go and make horror games that similarly relied on pacifist, don't get caught style gameplay. As a result, a cottage industry of low-cost, high-impact jump scare simulators flooded the space, lit YouTube on fire. I mean, you couldn't make it 8 thumbnails in any direction without seeing that stupid goddamn face. You know the one. The mouth open, the I'm so scared, the most contrived face in the world. It was everywhere. But shit, man, I guess it worked. Because even today, over a decade later, people are still using that goofy template for literally any kind of content, really. I stubbed my toe. My wife left me. We can't use this face for everything. Although, while we're talking about that thumbnail, that stupid template, I have to give a shout out to Nakey Jakey for probably the best version of that thumbnail I've ever seen. This thumbnail is to other thumbnails what the movie Idiocracy is to being alive in 2024. I think the Slender Man games, 8 Pages and Arrival, both had a pretty significant impact on horror gaming and YouTube and the whole jump scare circus. But if we want to talk about a real bombs dropped kind of moment, I think when Outlast hit, that's when we had Amnesia all over again, but then some. Outlast kind of had all the qualities that made Amnesia blow up a few years prior, but then it also had that energy to it and that mass appeal to it that the people who doubted Amnesia, the people who might have called Amnesia like slow or like uneventful, now those people were on board as well. So it just became this moment. Like Outlast became a thing that just further cemented the PC as a place where exciting new horror games were breaking through. And don't get me wrong, like Outlast did come to console. In fact, if we want to argue, all of these games that I've mentioned have probably at some point come to console. But everyone knew Outlast as a PC game. The place it blew up was on PC. The place that they were watching people play this game was on PC.
Oh, movies.
Barely a year later, another culture shifter drops, featuring animatronic puppets. You may have heard of it. It's a little game called Five Nights at Freddy's. And despite having graphics that looked like they were from a mid-90s FMV sequence, sorry, not sorry, it looked like shit. The game was massive. By this point in time, a whole new generation of little freako gamers had emerged who were totally used to the idea of the most viral and buzzworthy games being on PC. And the platform was to them where horror games lived. It was a platform where exciting things were happening and where streamers and content creators and all the people that they watched were playing the things that they were most excited about. And it was certainly starting to feel like that for a dusty old piece of shit like me. I mean, my favorite franchises, your Resident Evils and your Silent Hills, were waning or had just outright given up. I mean, we had that one beacon of hope, that one beacon of light, our dearly departed PT, aka Silent Hills, which was, well, it was cancelled about as quickly as it was announced, almost just to rub salt into a long, festering wound. As the decade wore on, there was no stopping the jump scare simulator. That train, she kept on rolling, choo-choo. But parallel to that, there were some really interesting games that were taking some swings that no one else was really taking, especially not off-platform. Pathologic 2, Faith, Doki Doki Literature Club, basically subverted an entire genre. Detention, Her Story was an amazing game. I mean, even Frictional Games themselves, who like kicked this whole revolution off, had come back with a game called Soma. A game that's actually, if I'm thinking about it, more celebrated than Amnesia for the ways that it explores like consciousness and humanity. Somewhere around the mid to late 2010s, the PC had just become another part of the conversation in the same way that PlayStation and Xbox had done before. And unlike my poor friend Gareth, who 25 years prior had been absolutely verbally deconstructed by all the neighborhood kids for even mentioning the fact that he played a video game on a PC, now everyone's doing it. If anything, a lot of the youth, a lot of them seem to prefer PC over a console. And honestly, I can't help but feel like a big catalyst behind that was Amnesia and YouTube and the new culture of behavior around not just horror, but video games in general. And finally, rest in peace, Gareth. I know you're up there somewhere saying "shake it, baby" with the worst Duke Nukem impression imaginable. This one's for you, bud. I wanted to take a moment at the end here to, well, just to thank everyone here for watching. Like, not only this video, but the previous video, which like, it got a little bit of a algorithm spice on it, a little bit of heat, which was really nice to see. For a little, you know, a little tiny nothing baby on the platform like me, every view, every sub, every like, every comment means a lot. It really does. So, you know, just press all the buttons down there, even the bad ones if you think this was this was shit. Plus, I mean, I love comments. I reply to, you know, almost all of them. The ones that say stuff like, "You're wrong and ugly." Those I tend not to engage with, but if you've got something constructive to say, I am all ears and eyes. In fact, it was a comment that inspired this very video. Thank you to @EmilioFedez4960 for the inspiration here. So, you know, you have some real sway here. You are a pretty big wheel down at this cracker factory. And that's it, thanks. I have social media if you care, but otherwise, hopefully I'll see you next time.